everybody, it's Matt from Trail Rider Camp. So about 2 weeks ago, I made a video about the Panhandle Trail. We had a rare 60-degree day in December, and so I was able to get out and do a little bit of filming. Well, here we are now in the first week of January, and it's about 15 degrees outside. So it doesn't look like I'm going to be getting on the trail anytime soon. But since I'm just sitting here in my car waiting for my son to finish up an indoor soccer practice, I figured this would be a good chance for me to do a short little video about one of the questions that a lot of people ask me, whether it be friends or colleagues or people that I know that are starting to kind of get into biking. And that is that they want to know about the itinerary I used when I did the GAP C&O trail from Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C. in the summer of 2022, so about 3 years ago. When I did it, I mean, it was phenomenal. A trip of a lifetime. I had so much fun. Every day was kind of a different adventure. And it's something that I feel like, even though I was fairly inexperienced at the time in terms of planning a bike trip, I wouldn't have changed anything about the logistics whatsoever. So this video is just meant to kind of share a little bit about what's in my itinerary, especially since this time of year tends to be when people are making their plans for their big trips in the upcoming summer. For the trip, we opted for a 6-day, 5-night adventure because we felt that, averaging about 50, 60 miles a day was kind of optimum for what we were comfortable with. We also opted to go 100% the credit card route and stay in hotels and rentals as opposed to camping. Both of us were fairly inexperienced in terms of long distance bike travel, and so we really didn't want to bog ourselves down with a bunch of extra equipment that would add extra weight when we were just kind of figuring things out. Now, since both of us are from Pittsburgh, it made sense for us to start at the Pittsburgh end. It was something where our wives could easily bring us down to Point State Park, drop us off, and we could go. We opted to then take the Amtrak train back from Washington, D.C. to Pittsburgh, and that was something that, in retrospect, I really regretted and did not enjoy whatsoever. Day one, we biked from Point State Park in Pittsburgh to Connellsville, Pennsylvania, which comes in right around 60 miles on the dot. We stopped about halfway in West Newton for lunch. There's a great roadside little burger shop called The Trailside, which is ran by local high school kids. Fantastic. You can sit out in a little covered deck looking out on the Youghiogheny River. Highly, highly recommend it. When we got to Connellsville, we stayed at the Comfort Inn and Suites. At the time, it was $140 for a 2-queen room. I looked it up just the other day. That same room for the same dates that we went in late July is now $186 after tax. However, it's well worth it. The Comfort Inn in Connellsville is much nicer than most Comfort Inns I've been to. There's a beautiful back patio that looks out on the river. I remember we stopped at the local Sheets and grabbed some 6-packs of beer and kind of just sat out there and relaxed. And then the next morning they have an awesome continental breakfast where we could kind of load up on eggs and waffles and yogurt, and also ate outside before we hopped on to our bikes and rode off for day 2. So highly, highly recommend the Comfort Inn in Connellsville. And you can actually walk across a nearby bridge into kind of like the town proper for some additional eating accommodations for dinner that night. Day 2, we did 56 miles from Connellsville to Meyersdale, PA. Even though it's 56 miles, day 2 was the hardest day of the trip by far. In large part due to the major increase in elevation, as you can kind of see at the bottom of my Google Maps screen there. The other thing is that we had some really bad weather that day. It rained extremely hard, and by the end, I had a really hard time even changing gears because of the amount of kind of gunked up sediment in my drivetrain. Early on in the day, you pass through Ohio Pile. We stopped there for kind of a second breakfast at the Falls Market. When I was there getting a breakfast sandwich, I also took advantage of the fact that they had pepperoni rolls for sale. And I'm really glad that I did this, because for long stretches of the ride today, there's really nowhere to stop in order to get a lunch if you're somebody that likes kind of eating on the fly. So that pepperoni roll ended up being my lunch. I just stashed it in my bag, and we ended up having lunch just kind of like off to the side of a trail on a bench at some random spot later on in the day. The other place that we stopped for kind of a longer period of time was in Rockwood. We went to the Trailhead Brewing Company, located literally right over the bridge in the town. I thought the beer was okay. However, the reviews really speak to the fact that it looks like that they've fixed things up quite a bit since I was there. So if you're into beer and you want a late day snack or something, definitely check that out. And then when we got to Meyersdale, we opted to stay in an Airbnb. Now, since then, at the time, there was only like one option. Now it looks like there's a solid 3 or 4 different options to pick from. All of them are kind of in the same ballpark price-wise. So ours, after taxes and fees, was $162.49. And I think that you actually might be able to beat that price today, given the fact that there's more options. We ended up eating dinner at a Sheetz, farther down in town. There's also Take 6 Pizza and Subs that's open most days from 11 to 10 o'clock at night. Day 3 was an awesome day on the trail. Altogether, we went 61 miles from Meyersdale, Pennsylvania to Paw Paw, West Virginia. We finished up the last 32 miles of the GAP Trail and ended in Cumberland right around time for lunch. The morning was really, really easy because you reached the peak of the Eastern Continental Divide not far past Meyersdale itself. And so much of the morning was just kind of easy coasting on down into town. When you get into Cumberland, you have the museum to check out. Now, it was closed when I was there. You have tons and tons of lunch options. And we opted to have lunch at a place called Curtis's Hot Dogs. I highly recommend it, but know that it's a cash-only business. And then we ran into a lot of cash-only businesses throughout the journey. So if you end up needing cash, there are some banks in town as well, not far from the trailhead. The other thing that's nice about taking a prolonged stop in Cumberland, in addition to there being lots of food and then the banking, is that you also have amenities like a big public bathroom. So I know that the day that we rode through it was warm, and so we took advantage of that to kind of reapply the butt paste before we got going on the C&O Canal. The C&O Canal Trail, really easy to find, and if for some reason you get lost or you need assistance, there are National Park Service employees at the museum that can point you in the right direction. The first part of the C&O tends to get really flooded out and really muddy. And so that was something that definitely slowed us kind of the second part of the day as we kind of limped into Paw Paw. Now, when we got to Paw Paw, we opted to stay in the Canal Cabins rentals. I cannot recommend this place enough. It's $120 a night, and you get your own little cabin that has air conditioning, water, basically anything that you need. It also has laundry facilities and a shower house and hoses to clean off your bike. So it has anything that a bike camper traveler could ever need. It's also right at the end of a gravel road to the Liberty gas station. So the Liberty gas station has beer and food. Across the street is a Dollar General if you need anything. There's a place called Big and Tiny's Tavern, also a stone's throw away. However, it was not open the day that we were there. And so what we opted to do for dinner was we walked a little bit farther up the road and went to the local American Legion. So you don't need to be a member. You can just sign in, and they got really cold drinks. They're extremely nice, well-priced stuff. And the food was actually really surprisingly good. So loved Paw Paw, West Virginia. They had a fire pit near the cabins, and firewood provided. So we ended up going, getting a good dinner, having a few beers, and hanging out by a campfire until we turned in around 10:30 at night. Day 4, we did 55 miles from Paw Paw, West Virginia to Williamsport, Maryland. For us, the biggest challenge of the day was that at the time, the Paw Paw tunnel was closed for stabilization efforts, and so we had to take the infamous bypass trail up and over the mountain. Well, it tended to be, not near as bad as I had heard from others. It was, a slow hour or so, but nothing terrible. And we were able to make up that time later on in the day when we ended up jumping on the Western Maryland Rail Trail, which runs parallel to the C&O Canal Trail for about 28 miles. A lot of people like to do this because the Western Maryland Rail Trail is paved, and it kind of corresponds with an area of the C&O Trail that tends to oftentimes be washed out and make for really slow going. So highly recommend that if you're not a purist and you don't mind, diverting slightly. The other thing that was cool about the Western Maryland Rail Trail is it kind of ends at Fort Frederick State Park. So if you're somebody that likes old historical forts and old, well-preserved historical sites, you can check that out kind of at the end of that trail. We stopped for lunch in Hancock, Maryland. There's lots and lots of different food options there. We ended up just going to a Sheetz and getting an MTO. And then we ended up staying at the Red Roof Inn in Williamsport. Now, the Red Roof Inn was kind of a gamble. It was the cheapest of the places that we stayed. It was only $70. And it sits about 2 miles back from the trail, way up in elevation on kind of the fringe of the town. You're basically at an exit to a nearby interstate. Well, despite some of the drawbacks of the location, I actually loved where we stayed. There was a Waffle House out front, so we took advantage of that for breakfast the next morning. There was also a fantastic pizza place across the street, and literally right next to the pizza place in the same plaza was an awesome beer store. So we ended up going there, getting some 6-packs of beer, and then the owners of the pizza place had no problem with us drinking the beer in the pizza shop while we enjoyed our pizza. The Red Roof Inn, frankly, was mostly abandoned. There was very few other people there. The room was clean. And when I looked it up recently, it seems like the price has not changed one iota in the 3 years since I did the trail. So definitely a good value if you're not hesitant about riding far away from the trail itself. Day 5 was our shortest mileage day of the trip by far. Only 45 miles from Williamsport, Maryland to Brunswick, Maryland. The reason why we opted for a short mileage day was kind of twofold. A, I'm a big history buff, and I had never been to Harpers Ferry, West Virginia before, so I wanted to afford us kind of some extra time to get off the bikes, walk around, and explore that town. The other reason, though, was that really Brunswick is like the last town of note before you get into Washington, D.C. And so you have about a 55-mile gap then for day 6. And, your option is really you do even a shorter mile day and stay in somewhere like Harpers Ferry. Or, you're basically talking camping. So we ended up, taking our time. We stopped in Harpers Ferry as planned. It was really cool. This is also the day that you ride along the area called Big Slackwater, which you see pictured in the image that I have up right now. We had a detour that we had to go to through this area, since this area oftentimes does see flooding. So that added a little bit of time to the trip. For lunch, we ended up eating a fantastic lunch in Shepherdstown, West Virginia. Shepherdstown ended up being really kind of the hidden gem of the trip that we had not really planned to stop at, but we ended up loving it, and we spent probably as much time there as we did in Harpers Ferry. We ate at a place called Maria's Taqueria. Highly recommend to anybody that's, into kind of Tex-Mex food and wants a really good lunch, they do have vegetarian and vegan options. Now, when we got to Brunswick, we stayed at the Travelodge by Wyndham. And out of all the lodgings on the trip, this is the one that I really regret, and I would not stay there again. Nothing against the Travelodge. The accommodations were fine, but it's a 2-story hotel that does not have an elevator. And of course, we were on the 2nd floor. It also was, like in Williamsport, set up apart from the trail by probably a few miles. And that few miles was precariously uphill, probably the hardest riding that we did at all on the whole trip. I was doing some Googling, and what I found is that since we went through, it appears that there's now a number of Airbnbs located in the vicinity of Brunswick, Maryland. In fact, we had paid $123.75 to stay at the Travelodge back in 2022. The current price of the Travelodge is now $160, and I saw that you could get 2 separate Verbo rentals, each for somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 to $160 a night. So that would be my suggestion to maybe check out for lodging in Brunswick, Maryland. Finally, day 6 was a 55-mile day from Brunswick into the Georgetown section of Washington, D.C. Now, from there, we definitely added a few additional miles as we kind of navigated the mall and rode to the Amtrak station, which is located back behind the U.S. Capitol building. So altogether, I believe that we probably did somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 miles that day. In terms of food options, this is definitely a day like day 2 that I would recommend packing a lunch, because you really don't pass much on the trail whatsoever until you get into DC proper. There's a few options that appear in Google Maps, but again, they tend to be right near kind of the end of your ride. The end terminus of the trail is tough to find. There's not really much in the way of signage, and it is located behind the Thompson Boat Center. So that took us some time to find. And then, like I said, we headed on over to the train station and took the train back to Pittsburgh, which cost us $126 total at the time. To close, I put a screenshot of my budget spreadsheet for the trip. And you can see that the total cost for 2 people staying in accommodations, 5 nights, no camping, plus the cost of transportation, an Amtrak, ride back to Pittsburgh with 2 bikes, cost us $743, or a total of $371 per person. Something that I thought was a great value and very doable budgetarily for most people. If you did it without transportation today with adjusted costs, that would be a total of about $677 or $338.50 per person without transportation. So costs have gone up. The trail's gotten more popular than ever. But again, you don't have to be a rich person to do this. Get a buddy. You can stay at the same places that I stayed, and you're talking 300 and something bucks, and then you just need to figure out how to get to each end and how to get home.